All right, greetings everyone. I'm going to begin the lecture recording here by apologizing for what I can only imagine is going to be a very rough recording and lecture experience for you. As I said in my email to all of you guys, I don't think that digital learning experiences, are any substitute for being in the classroom. But since that's an impossibility for us right now, we're going to go on ahead, try and make some headway while we can, so that we can get on to better and maybe not more important things, but certainly more advanced things in the semester, and try and get as much done during the semester as we can. So I am in my I'm in my home office space right now. I actually my family and I have recently moved house. So as I was preparing for this lecture, I was going from room to room in our new house, unboxing all the required home office stuff that I need, because I haven't set up my home office space yet. Haven't been able to do that, and didn't anticipate needing to be able to record from home. So for that reason and others, that's why you're not going to see me during this lecture today. I simply don't have a camera that is worthy of the name, but I will be recording my voice, showing you the slides, and going over the material as we go along in today's lecture. I am not in the house alone. My family is obviously also stuck at home, so you're likely to hear them. And my two dogs are here as well. So if a disturbance comes by, you're likely to really hear them. And so I apologize for the dogs in advance, and hopefully you'll bear with me, bear with us as we make this recording. I hope you're all doing well. So today's lecture is a continuation, of course, of the material that we began talking about this week ago now, last Thursday, where we introduced sort of the idea of digital forensics in a really high-level way. So we're going to drill down on some of that in today's lecture. So here's an outline for today's lecture. 3 main areas of interest for us. What is digital forensics? What kind of things can we expect out of it, and how do we position it in the pantheon of other pursuits? What are the principles of the scientific method, and how is that going to apply to what we need to do as digital forensics professionals? And we're also going to talk about the relevance and quality of evidence, and how evidentiary data is really going to be what drives our pursuit when we're doing digital forensics. So let's begin with trying to answer the question, what is digital forensics? So I think last time I kind of asked you what comes to mind when we say forensics. And generally when we say forensics, we use that word. What comes to mind is the notion of scientific forensics, or forensic science. That's the first bullet point. That's the application of science to legal problems and investigations. As we said last time, the word forensic comes from the Latin forensis, which means to put before the forum. Everything is based on evidence. It's the evidence that we collect that gives us insight into what we can, or what we think we can know about what happens. We collect that evidence in a meaningful and reliable way. We put it before the forum, right? Before the judges or the decision makers, and we let them judge our evidence to see if they also believe it's reliable, and if we can all come to an agreement about what occurred. For forensic science, the kind of evidence we're going to be using are exactly the kinds of things that you guys came up with last Thursday. Things like DNA, blood splatter, ballistic evidence, decomposition science. Physical aspects of evidence are key when you're dealing with forensic science. Everything can be collected, can be touched, can be cataloged. Digital forensics is a little different. It is a branch of forensics involving the recovery and investigation of digital evidence. Right? If a computer is used in a crime, then you're going to require digital forensics in order to be able to collect the evidence required to put before the forum, right? To put before the judges. Digital evidence, therefore, is data stored or transmitted using a digital device that is relevant to a legal investigation. With digital forensics, the idea is to create a chain of reasoning to provide a description of what has occurred by describing what's been observed, right? The digital things, the digital content that's been observed, but also by investigating the state of the system. How was the system used? How was the computer used? And what does that mean about who must have done it and what must have happened? So often these chains of custody, this digital evidence, doesn't lead us to a clear-cut, unambiguous conclusion. And so consideration in those cases has to be made for probabilities. What's the likelihood that because we found digital evidence that looked like this, that it must be that substantiates a theory that we have about what occurred, who used the computer, who used the digital devices, and when they used it. Oftentimes, we try to rise to the level of certain standards, and the standards change, as we'll look about when we talk about the next module, when we look into the legal aspects of digital forensics, that the standards change depending on what kind of court we're in, what kind of proceeding we're in. But one of the things that you've probably heard about before is this notion of the, quote, preponderance of evidence. We are never going to be able to say with 100% certainty what occurred. We can't do that with physical evidence. We certainly can't do that with digital evidence because we don't have time machines. We can't back up and go back to the past and observe exactly what happened. The only thing we can observe is the remainder, the leftovers of what has happened. So we need to be able to substantiate any theories that we have in as many ways as possible, which means being as complete as we can be about collecting digital evidence and being always as reliable as we can be with that digital evidence. Here's the key, though. It's very easy for us to convince ourselves that what we're looking for is what we found, or that what we found proves a thing we already believed was true. Okay, it's super easy to allow us that the things we find, right? We look at amongst the things we find, we look at and highlight the things that support the thing we're looking for, and we tend to diminish the things that are in evidence against whatever hypothesis we have formed, right? This is a kind of cognitive bias that you find in humans. It's just a thing that our brains do. It's called confirmation bias. And as digital forensics professionals, we have to fight against this bias where our brain wants to confirm for us, based on the evidence that we like, based on the evidence that we like, and ignoring the evidence we don't like, that something must be true. As a professional, right, our reasoning about what we are seeing in front of us has to be not swayed by our emotional or innate beliefs or thinking, right? We have to convince not only ourselves, but we have to always remember that we have to convince other people. That's what forensics is. That's why we have it. It's putting evidence before the forum, right? And who are those people? Well, again, we'll talk about who those people might be when we try and position digital forensics in the next module in its rightful position in relation to the legal system, right? Who those actors might be. But for now, just keep in mind that there's a wide variety of people that we might have to convince. And so we need to keep that in mind. Our whole objective is to not only find the correct answer, right, about what occurred and what did not occur, right, to be able to support that with the evidence that we've collected, but also and ultimately to be able to convince other people about what we found, right? So there are several subdisciplines of digital forensics. Those include at least the four that you're seeing on the slide now. Computer forensics is forensics related to an individual computer, right? That's where we're going to begin doing a lot of our technical investigation that we do in the lab with the lab works for this class. Computer forensics, you have a computer, it is a self-contained device, and we're going to investigate that self-contained device. We're going to collect digital evidence in a way that is reliable. We're going to document the digital evidence that we find in a way that is reliable and reproducible. And then we're going to bring our judges, whoever they may be, the evidence they need to be able to make righteous conclusions. Then there's network forensics. That's forensics that's related to network components. So multiple computers linked together over a network. Then there's mobile device forensics, and then there's malware forensics. And the reason the content of this slide may sound familiar to you is that I've already last time kind of talked about the outline of this semester, and you'll notice that like computer forensics, network forensics, mobile device forensics, these are all entire modules that we're going to see that we are scheduled to look at in the coming weeks and months. So we're going to cover all that in due time. And there are a lot of professions that use digital forensics, not just digital forensics investigators, but of course, they're high on the list. They're the first bullet point there. Digital forensics examiners make use of digital forensics. Well, duh. But also lawyers, right? And an entire criminal justice umbrella of individuals that make use of digital forensics, right? For both conventional crimes, you've got criminals that have cell phones, criminals that are carrying those cell phones with them when they commit crimes, but or potentially cyber crimes, criminals that pursue criminal malicious activity solely through the use of a computer. This is maybe not surprising. Everything in our lives is becoming digital. Computers rather are ubiquitous in our society. So anything that happens is recorded or interacts with a computer, and a lot of things that happen in a virtual space. Both kinds of things require expert analysis by digital forensics practitioners. Data recovery. Data recovery is a huge thing. If your servers go down, you want to be able to recover that information. You want to be able to recover something after an attack. So digital forensics is important for there. IT support and administration, network analysis and management, software engineering, right? That means not only amongst people who are good at programming or whose job it is to be a software engineer, not only writing secure code, which is critical. And so you have a background in digital forensics or the knowledge about digital forensics, and that can inform how you write your code. But of course, writing the digital forensics tools themselves. We need professionals that can help us by providing reliable tools for doing digital forensics. So software engineering is implicated in that field. Digital archivists, being able to verify documents, military intelligence. I put that at the bottom of the list, but of course that's very important in and of itself. So digital forensics touches a lot of different areas. Maybe you don't want to be a digital forensics investigator or a digital forensics practitioner when you grow up, as they say, and when you graduate college and finally begin your career. But knowledge about this is still going to be important and useful in a wide variety of fields that you might go into. So let's talk about the scientific method. The scientific method, as presented on this slide, 5 points, 5 parts of the scientific method, is a concept that I think you were probably first introduced to in elementary school, right? And then reintroduced to time and again in more complicated ways throughout your secondary education, and maybe even when you're taking your natural science required electives in college here at UNA. You're familiar with the concept of the scientific method. I don't have to tell you what it is, right? You make observations, you form hypotheses, you make predictions, you then experiment, and the point of those experimentations is to try and what? Prove your hypothesis? No. And this is critical. You're not trying to prove your hypothesis. That is probably impossible to prove your hypothesis. Instead, what you're trying to do with your experiment is you're trying to disprove your hypothesis. That is your objective, to disprove the thing you were pretty sure was true. If you are not trying to disprove your hypothesis, then what you're practicing is not science, but dogma. It could be a religious belief that you have. Something that cannot be disproved by direct evidence is not something that we're going to apply the scientific method to. It's simply not. Luckily, in digital forensics, we are definitely interested in things that can be proved by direct and indirect evidence, right? So we're going to use the scientific method, but still, we're going to be trying mostly to disprove the hypothesis that we find. And you're like, well, it's easy to disprove the hypothesis. I can just believe something that I know is not true. Of course. But when you disprove your hypothesis, your next step is not you are done. Your next step is to dive back to step one, make new observations, make new hypotheses, make new predictions, and do new experiments, which hopefully get you closer to the capital T truth of the universe. The scientific method is interested in the truth of the universe. Now, we're not about such lofty goals in digital forensics. Forensics is the application of science to investigations. We're trying to figure out what happened in a limited scope, but it's still critical for us to follow the scientific method. An investigation hinges on evidence. Evidence is critical to every investigation. So that evidence, you can bet, will be scrutinized heavily, and its credibility will be attacked. So we must demonstrate the rigor through thorough, accurate documentation. Our experiments need to be documented. The results have to be documented. And I'm going to put this here right now, that this is one of the major focuses of this course. Documenting what we find, right? And how we found it, in a way that allows us to prove the reliability of the evidence and the conclusions that those evidence led us to, and the hypotheses that were formed based on those evidence, and the results of the experiments that we conducted. This is a part of this class that I think students who are signing up for the class because they are quote-unquote interested in digital forensics sort of underestimate the importance of that topic. It is one of the major things we are going to be doing. We're going to be documenting. Okay? Everything is about recording what we do and how we do it so that we can present that to what? To the forum, right? Forensics, after all. We need to guard, however, against the instinct to jump to conclusions, right? That's really the reason why we're using the scientific method. That's why science is important to us. Because science is the best method that we have to keep ourselves from fooling ourselves. That's it. That seems like a simple thing, but consider this. No one is better at fooling you than you are at fooling yourself, right? You can believe anything you want to believe, and your brain will make itself happy by happily going down those roads of cognitive biases, of confirmation bias, right? To feel happy about your understanding of the world, right? Are we all on the back of a turtle? Does lightning come from the gods? Is it snowy outside because some god was mad at us? Lower G God? I don't know. I don't personally think so, but it's not ridiculous that people once believed that to be solely and convincingly the case. That was an easy explanation, right? And if you do believe that easy explanation, then you begin to you begin to find evidence of those things, right? There's an interesting cognitive wrinkle that's been observed. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Maybe you'll see this in your life as you go along. But if you hear about a thing for the first time, right, or you think about a thing for the first time, then people throughout across demographics report that because they heard about that thing for the first time, they suddenly begin seeing that thing everywhere, right? It's interesting. The Dunning-Kruger effect was one of the things that exhibited Dunning-Kruger for me. When I first heard about that, it seemed like for the next month or two, I heard about it everywhere. I was like, why did I keep hearing about this? Because my brain was primed to hear about it. I don't know that I hadn't heard about it before I became primed to hear about it. It just didn't matter to me. Okay, we are very capable of fooling ourselves because we want things to be true, because it makes us feel good when things make sense, or make sense to us anyway. The way to truth, the way to understanding about the reality of the world, right? And in our limited scope, the way to understanding about what really happened during the use of during the use of some computer, right? What does the evidence really mean? The way to keep ourselves from fooling ourselves is through the use of science. Okay, we have to understand who is suspected of doing what, who the players are, what's the background of the people and the tools, the systems that they use. Why has the investigation begun? Second, right? So that's I'm going to make 5 bullet points here, and I'm going to kind of restate the steps of the scientific method for us, right? Second, where form hypothesis is what you see on the screen, form or revise a hypothesis, stressing the iterative nature of that here, right? And the next slide kind of talks about what a good hypothesis is for digital forensics. Then develop predictions. Use the hypothesis to predict what you should find. If you're correct in your hypothesis, go back through the evidence and see if the evidence supports your claim. You're not trying to prove your hypothesis. You're trying to do what? You're trying to disprove it. Okay? You're trying to refute it. That's a word we're going to see in just a second. Conduct experiments on the evidence in our case. And then you need to, in this final point, very important, remember how I said documentation is everything? The end goal of all of our documentation is a final report. Keep in mind who the audience is. A lot of the times the audience is not going to be someone who's an expert in the tools and techniques that you used as a digital forensics practitioner, right? As a professional digital forensics investigator. So you need to write your report based on the audience, based on that you expect to see. Perhaps an audience of laypersons, perhaps an audience who doesn't have the background and knowledge that you have. Okay? So as I promised, how do you select a good hypothesis, right? A scientific hypothesis should be the following things. It should be falsifiable. It should be consistent, but it should be simple. Falsifiable means that it must be possible to show that the hypothesis is false by some feasible test. Okay, some feasible test. It has to be consistent. The hypothesis must be consistent with all previous observations. Okay? Let's go back to falsifiability for just a second. It seems maybe, I think, at first glance that if you have a hypothesis, there ought to be a test to prove that hypothesis is not true. But I remember back, so I was into high school. You can maybe imagine that I was kind of a nerd in high school. Proud nerd. Still am a nerd, so don't get me wrong. But me and my nerdy friends would hang out after school. And I remember one of my nerdy friends was fond of claiming to be God. Okay, so he said, I am God. We're like, Samir was his name. Samir, I know you. You are not God. He said, no, I really am. Prove I'm not. It's like, well, you make mistakes. Oh yeah, it made it look like I made mistakes, but I really meant to do everything that I meant to do. Okay, if you're God, then make it summer right now. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. It's not within my will because I'm God. Okay. Any kind of test that you could come up with, there was some explanation that he would have. So it was impossible to prove through direct investigation that he wasn't God. Nonetheless, I never believed that he is God, right? I don't believe that. But the hypothesis, Samir is God, is not a good hypothesis because it's not falsifiable, right? So we need to have falsifiable hypotheses. Consistent. The hypothesis must be consistent with all previous observations, right? Simple. Other considerations being equal, a simpler observation should be preferred over a more complex observation. It's kind of a corollary to a thing called Occam's razor. If you're interested in Occam's razor, you can look that up. But keep it simple. Keep it simple, and simple is better, at least when it comes to hypothesis. Okay, so if we have a hypothesis, then how do we design a good test for what are we trying to do? For proving that hypothesis? No. For refuting that hypothesis. That's the first bullet point here. A good test for digital forensics should have a high chance of refuting the hypothesis. Okay? It should be directly related to the hypothesis. It's got to be tractable. That means it has to be feasible to do the test given the resources and the time available. And until you kind of get into digital forensics evidence and start to see exactly how much evidence there is that can be collected, the importance of a test's tractability or feasibility maybe isn't obvious. But when you've got hundreds or thousands of gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes of data, then not every test is going to be feasible. You need to have a test that eliminates as much of that data as fast as possible. So a good test is going to be one that you can actually do in the amount of time and resources that you have. You have to use sound techniques. What are those sound techniques? Well, that's a major topic, again, that we're going to be covering this semester. What kind of techniques lead us to reliable conclusions through reliable evidence? How do we get that reliable evidence? How do we process evidence reliably? Again, that's a major topic and a technical topic that we're going to be covering throughout the semester. But it's critical that our tests use those sound techniques. The test could be through passive examination or active examination. Is it a thing that we can observe as it's happening? Or is it a thing that we have to collect and process later on? Okay? Again, we're going to hit on this notion of refutation. Refutation is a test to confirm the hypothesis, should include tests to try to refute the hypothesis, to make it clear that that hypothesis is wrong. And this slide, again, talks about the confirmation bias. I should never conclude that a party is guilty, right, unless all other viable explanations are refuted. Can't prove a thing is true. Can't prove it, generally speaking. Because, again, we don't have time machines. But I can make a hypothesis, right? I can then use reliable tests to show that the status of the evidence that I have in front of me matches the expected status of that kind of evidence, given that this hypothesis was true. Okay? And remember, I have just a limited subset of evidence that I can examine. And maybe even a limited subset of evidence. Out of all the evidence, out of all the possible evidence, only some part of it could be collected. The rest of it is gone because it happened in the past. So if I find evidence that matches the structure of evidence that I would expect to find, given that my hypothesis is true, can I reliably say that hypothesis is true? No, because I'm only looking at a subset of all the evidence that I could have collected, right? So I need to collect more evidence. I need to collect different kinds of evidence. I need to be creative in the kinds of evidence and the sources of evidence that I collect. You guys have talked about, a lot of you talked about things in your review of information security class. What is that? ITE 259 or 249? I forget the number for that. But you guys did homework about this. A lot of you talked about the systems that need to be in place to support this kind of analysis. Why do those systems need to be in place? Because if those systems are not in place, then this evidence cannot be collected, and so we can't come to any meaningful, can't come to any meaningful decision about any hypothesis that we might have. So we need to be creative and careful about how we collect that evidence and have a lot of different sources. And we need to, it's only if through our evidence, through our investigations, right, through our tests, that we have tests that show, look, I did tests that would clearly refute this hypothesis, and I did a bunch of them on a bunch of different types of evidence. Only then can I begin to believe that this subset of the evidence, these different subsets of evidence, and the failure to refute our hypothesis leads me to have a more strong belief, a stronger belief that my hypothesis is true. Okay? That's what we're about. That's the whole point of digital forensics investigation. Example hypothesis. Adam downloaded legal content from website X. Evidence of guilt. Network analysis shows him downloading data from site X. All right, great. That evidence is conclusive. We are done with our investigation. Adam is fired. Wait a second. Record scratch. There's some other evidence that we need to investigate. Further examination shows the data were served through a banner ad while Adam was shopping for yarn for his kitten orphanage. Uh-oh. See how if we don't try to refute the hypothesis, right? If we don't collect all that evidence and try to actively refute the hypothesis, then it'd be very easy to come to a conclusion. The old saying, I think, goes something like this. I think it's attributed to a bunch of different people throughout history, but something like this: give me a few lines from an innocent man, and I will get you a conviction, or I will have him convicted and hung, or something along that. Sometimes it's more colorful than that. Why? A few lines from an innocent man, because just a few lines, right, is all it takes for us to come. For the judges to activate their confirmation bias. We want to, as professionals, we want to overcome that limitation of human cognition. The ultimate goal, the end result, the critical final deliverable of everything we're going to do, of all the investigation that we're going to do, right? This is the ultimate goal. Everything's driving toward this. We cannot do our investigation without keeping this ultimate goal in mind, is to create a report. All the documentation we're going to do, and we're going to do tons of documentation, is all done because we want to create a final report about our findings. And that final report should target the general layperson audience. That means the person with no expertise in the area of digital forensics or in computers in general. Right? You can't assume the background about who this report is for. In that report, I need to shy away from ever explicitly asserting that a party is guilty or innocent. The purpose of the report will be to present and explain the evidence that we collected, how we collected it, making sure to show the layperson that it is reliable. Leave the deciding of the guilt up to the judges and the juries. And the report should tell a story, should bring the reader of the report up to the precipice of a conclusion, and then let them make that conclusion. Okay? Circumstantial versus direct evidence. Direct evidence shows that an event occurred. Circumstantial evidence implies that an event occurred, but other explanations are possible. If you watch enough legal dramas, legal procedurals on TV, right, and you'll say, objection, circumstantial. And that the judge will then be like either sustained or overruled. What are they talking about? What does circumstantial mean? Why are we critical of circumstantial evidence? Because circumstantial evidence doesn't prove the thing itself. It only implies that an event occurred. A bunch of rowdy-looking 20-year-olds, okay, with all their crazy clothes and whatnot, are standing outside of a record store. They're just kind of lounging around. Record store. Look at me, I'm so old. Where do you guys go? You're standing outside of Taco Bell, okay? You're standing outside of Taco Bell. Someone runs up to the counter and says, my purse has been stolen. It's been stolen, right? And the police come by and they see you guys, right? And they're like, oh, there's a motley crew. And so they stop you and they say, hey, we need to search you. And one of you has a wad of money in the pocket, in one of your jacket pockets. Did you steal that lady's money? Certainly looks like it. Where'd this money come from? Right? You guys have been standing here all day. Where'd you get this money? I know you don't work. You stood here all day, right? Where'd you get this money? It's proof. It's proof positive that you stole that lady's money. No, it's not. It's circumstantial evidence. You happen to have a wad of money in your pocket. Somebody over here claims to have lost a wad of money. Is it the same wad of money? I don't know. Where would the direct evidence be, right? If someone, if we could go to where she was sitting and get your fingerprints, right, and maybe see that you had her specific purse, right, standing next to you, that would be direct evidence. But a lot of the things we rely on are circumstantial evidence, and that's why we need to be careful about that, because circumstantial evidence, if we over rely on it, can lead us to the wrong conclusion. Multiple pieces of circumstantial evidence, however, can help us corroborate a hypothesis. So what about circumstantial evidence and its relationship to digital evidence? All right, here's the thing. Digital evidence is usually circumstantial. Does that mean we can ignore it? No. Digital evidence links computers to events. Linking a person to an event requires some additional evidence, though. Right? That was what this slide was about. The network analysis shows him downloading data from site X. Wait a second. Did it show him downloading data from site X? No, it showed that, let's rewrite this second bullet point. It said that the computer that he typically uses and that he is the owner of was found to have downloaded content from site X. Site X sent content to that computer. That computer stored that content. That content was illegal. But that's just circumstantial. Who was the agent that performed this download, right? Who was the person sitting at the computer when this happened, right? We need additional evidence. We need additional sources of evidence to be able to link the person themselves to the activity that occurred on just the computer itself. Digital evidence directly links a computer to an event, but only circumstantially links the computer's owner to that event, right? And so we're going to need multiple sources of digital evidence. Everything is saying here that about the criticality of collecting not only evidence, but a lot of evidence, being able to handle that evidence correctly. This idea of forensic soundness, it's roughly equivalent to best practice. There's that D word. We're going to document all the steps in handling and analyzing evidence, right? We don't have a problem to solve. We have a procedure to follow. We know the procedure, the steps that we need to take, and among those steps, a major aspect of those steps is the documentation of things. Okay? We're not just playing a video game, right, with people's lives. We are going to be making paperwork. Okay? We're going to be storing paperwork to document exactly what happened and how it happened. Ensure the evidence is not damaged or altered. That's a trickier thing than it might seem. It's easy, as we talked about before. It's easier, anyway, to ensure that evidence is not damaged or altered, and that altered part is critical, to ensure that the evidence is not altered if it's physical evidence. But if it's digital evidence, it's just bits. So how can we make sure that none of the bits changed from when it was collected to when it was analyzed? Because it's just bits. We wouldn't know it. If it had changed, would we? We need a way. We're going to talk about the ways in order to do that. The analysis must be objective and unbiased, right? And this notion is unrelated to the distinction between circumstantial and direct evidence. So forensic soundness applies to all the evidence that we're going to collect. We need to maintain evidence integrity, the integrity of evidence. I need to ensure that the evidence is not damaged or altered. Any alterations must be precisely documented. We've got to do whatever we can to avoid the loss of evidence, and that has a major impact on how we handle digital evidence. And I need to avoid the introduction of artifacts to the evidence that might confuse the investigation. Again, the techniques that we use to ensure evidence, they're all technical techniques. Tools can be applied. But just like the example of Casey Anthony's case from last time, tools that are applied can be applied wrongly. And that can lead us to wrong conclusions. So technical knowledge, technical expertise is something that you're going to have to gain in order to be a digital forensics investigator, and it is an aspect of this class, a huge aspect of this class. We're going to get we aren't doing it yet, not yet in the semester, but we're going to put our fingers to keyboards. We're going to do sandboxed live investigations on sandbox stored data from computers and see how the process works, right? We're going to get our hands dirty, so to speak, by dealing with lab environment investigations of actual computer images. Right? I'm going to skip this for now. Come back to that at another time. We talked about the chain of custody. This is the last thing I want to talk about for today's lecture. The chain of custody is documentation of every person who handles the evidence. Several people will likely handle the evidence before the digital forensics examiner does, before you do. Incomplete documentation could result in inadmissible evidence. How do we maintain? How do we get that documentation? Everything is about proving not only, our job is not only to prove to our own satisfaction what occurred, but to prove to everyone else's satisfaction what occurred, and to be able to reliably show that the way we came to that conclusion was unassailable from a logical viewpoint. And that's going to require lots of documentation. Okay? All right. So at this point, if we were in the same room with each other, I'd be asking if you had any questions. But since I can't hear from you right now, I'll simply say this. If you have questions about anything at this stage in the semester, please send me an email. Watch Canvas because some readings are going to be opening up. Some required readings out of the textbook are going to be opening up. So go to Canvas for more information about that. All right, I hope you're well, and I will, Lord willing, I'll see you next week. All right, bye-bye.